Welcome, everybody, to the show. It is Connor Clipping stream number 92 for September 26th, 2022. Tonight, we are once again drinking Glenmorangie Lasanta, which is still very good. And we are clipping still, and probably will be for a little while yet, La Bataille de Quatre Bras. So we are going to continue with that for quite a while. Our topic tonight is North Africa in World War II. Before we get started with all the stuff, let me remind everybody to like the stream, support the channel, subscribe, and if you want to help even more, consider becoming a patron or doing super chats or anything like that. Super chats are on. I will remind you that it not only supports the stream, but it will help me not miss your comment should you have a comment. We are live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm not sure what good any of that does because there's like one person that watches on Twitch and nobody watches anywhere else. Everybody watches on YouTube. So that's probably not worth the time. I will mention that we are getting closer and closer as we creep week to week to Counterclipping show number 100, upon which we will have a giveaway. That'll be before the end of the year. But before that, as I mentioned, I think last week, October 22nd represents Ardwulf's Lair as an enterprise. 15th birthday. That's dated from the blog, not the YouTube channel, which dates back to, I believe, 2007, 2009, I believe, actually. And I didn't start doing wargaming stuff till about 2014. But nevertheless, we're gonna have a big thing. So make sure you don't miss the Counter Clipping streams during October. There will be 5 of them on each of the 5 Monday nights. There will be giveaways. There will be a discount code. You all know where the discount code's coming from. So bide your time if at all possible. So let me get started by saying hello to 6 Actual, Abraxas MF, Achilles, BC Games, Bill Simoni, Brent McCabe, Brian Foley, Christopher Prest, Krusty Captain, Daniel Silverthorne, David Imperato, E4 Airman, Ed Holtzman, Findle 70, Iggy Cricktal, Jeff Anderson, Jeffrey Edwards, Joe Faust, John Clark. Joe, we should talk. I'm like 20 minutes from you now. John Clark, Carl Creeder from the Wargame Bootcamp, Kilroy, if Kilroy was here, is in fact here, Lee Grant, Matt Davidson, Mike Anthony, Nikki Bauer, Perfidious Albion, Ray Musselman, Rick Kelly, Rob Johnson, Ronald Nicholson, Roy McGaw, welcome to the stream, Rudy Amandara, Sean Torno, Stigler is in the house, Tim Greenshaw, if you haven't been here before, welcome, Tim Zales, Vince Ree, and William Bird, and the legendary Fucko is actually not here yet, because he's doing me a favor right now by picking something up that got shipped to the old house. We might talk about that a little bit later. So thanks, everybody, very much. Jeff Beeler, thank you so much. What is the influence of the Rat Patrol? That's an interesting question. I don't really have a clear recollection of the Rat Patrol. This was a TV show about North Africa that I saw a few times and liked as a kid. So... yes, Mike Anthony, wait for the first Counter Clipping stream in October, and we'll have a discount code for you over there. So we're going to talk about North Africa stuff. There's not really any wargame news to report that I'm aware of, so we're not going to take any time doing that. We continue to play Last Blitzkrieg, and we are still in turn 2. And I did share some of the pictures on Twitter if you want to see them. So follow me on all the social media channels. Now on TikTok, don't know why. So we are kind of in the middle of turn 2, around the middle of turn 2, and there's been what's sure looking like pretty close to. I mean, the 2nd and 116th Panzer divisions are seriously threatening to break out. And the 1st SS Division has broken out, but it's also gotten its supply tether severed. So we're going to have to try and extract 1st SS Panzer before they activate on turn 3. Everybody in that sector has already gone. So we're going to talk about North Africa. And this is a topic, a World War II topic that I really haven't done much with until relatively recently. When I actually have played a few North African games. It's not a topic I am particularly steeped in, so I'm very curious to hear what the chat has to say about interesting games that may appear in North Africa. And we have a list to go through here today. So when I was kind of prepping for this, we're now at the point where we're prepping for these things, by the way. So there's that. So we can try to stay a little better on topic, which we have done successfully for the past few weeks. We will be talking about the BCS games, and we will be talking about Desert Fox Deluxe. It is on the list. However, the things that we are not going to talk about are tactical games that may have stuff that aligns in North Africa, but it's not really North Africa games. So these include things like Desert Steel. This is a game from West End in 1989. It's part of the tank. That's the Tank Leader series game on North Africa. We're not really going to talk about that other than mentioning these games right now. The Undaunted North Africa, which came out, I believe, 2 years ago. That is from friend of the channel, David Thompson. Looks great, but it's another tactical game that just happens to take place in North Africa, and it's part of a larger system. Of course, ASL gets an honorable mention here as well. North Africa wasn't covered by Squad Leader, but was covered by ASL in 2 modules, West of Alamaine and Hollow Legions, and both from Avalon Hill, obviously. And then those were later redone by Multi-Man, and right now the desert stuff is being broken up differently. The British module is now called For King and Country and doesn't include any desert stuff, and all of the desert stuff is now included in the new Hollow Legions, which came out about 2 years ago, I believe, and which contains the Italian stuff and all of the desert stuff, including the rules, the map boards, and all that jazz. I assume, but do not know, that the advanced Tobruk system, which we will mention Tobruk here as well, has representation in North Africa. I'm going to make that assumption. They're covering everything else. They might as well. Same deal with Lock and Load Tactical. There's North Africa box for that. Panzer. Now, when I say Panzer, I mean the old Jacinto Panzer from James Day. The module 88 was the original North Africa module, and I think either the new GMT version has the North Africa box coming, or it has just come out relatively recently, but I'm not 100% sure on exactly that timing. And of course, Panzer Grenadier. I actually had some of the North Africa stuff for Panzer Grenadier, and it went away with all the rest of the Panzer Grenadier because I ended up not liking it. So the way I see it in the context of war games, you could kind of divide North Africa into kind of 3 different sectors, if you will, or eras or modes or whatever. There's the Western Desert game, or Western Desert topic, which runs from sort of mid 1940, but really late 1940, all the way into 1942. And that's the one that we hear a lot about with Rommel and Montgomery comes in pretty late. We'll talk about all this stuff. We'll talk about the timeline. But Western Desert is where is where Rommel made his name. Let me put it that way. So there's a lot of romance about that, and there's been a lot of games on the Western Desert. Most North Africa games that don't just cover a tactical action of some kind cover the Western Desert campaign. It was very easy for me to find a list of 30 notable Western Desert games. I have 8 for the next section, which is Torch to Tunisia, which is November 42 at the Torch landings, all the way through to the fall of Tunis and Algiers in late 42? It is mid 43, actually. And that, of course, includes things like Katherine Pass, which has been relatively well covered. And then we have the sort of not really in North Africa anymore thing of the Near East, right? And there's not many games on that. The Near East in World War II. There's just as many games on that topic as there are games on East Africa in World War II, which means there's a very small handful. And I noted exactly 4 in that sector. So we'll talk about those. And then, of course, there's these relatively small subset of games that cover the whole thing. They cover all of North Africa in World War II, possibly excluding the Near Eastern stuff. I only found 4 that I felt were recognizable titles and were, worth talking about. So basic timeline here. In June of 1940, the Italians start monkeying around with the across the border in, of course, this is the border of Italian North Africa, so Libya and Egypt. Around this time, the Germans start sending some aid, which is pretty much exclusively Luftwaffe, as far as I know. They don't start sending ground troops for a while. The Italians actually invade Egypt in September of 1940. Yes, I'm working on an outline for this because I didn't want to misstate any of the dates. Um, the British counterattack to that, which pretty much destroys the invading Italian army, happens during Operation Compass, which runs from December of 1940 to February of 41. There's some very famous battles in here, including Beta Fam and Hellfire Pass and Sidi Barani and Bardia. The DAC, the Desert Africa Corps, is founded in February 1941, but Rommel doesn't take over until March. And he pretty much immediately goes on the offensive. This is Unternehmen Sonnenblume, Operation Sunflower, in which the British, who are kind of holding position at this point because they shipped all their stuff to Greece, are at a severe disadvantage. And it's a back and forth seesaw battle for quite a while. After Operation Compass, there is Operation Brevity and Operation Battle Axe. The latter of Operation Brevity is these are both limited operations. They both are just trying to take a small amount of territory. Operation Brevity is successful. Operation Battle Axe is not. Wavell gets sacked in the wake of who's the British person in charge at the time. Wavell gets sacked at that time and is replaced by Auchinleck. O'Connor's in here somewhere too, but I didn't write that down. Followed by, in November, December of 1941, Operation Crusader, which is the big one. There's several big battles here. There's Sidi Gareg, there's Gazala, there's Bir al Gobi. There's a bunch of these things. And I tried to pick up a lot of the battle games too, but obviously I'm going to leave a bunch out. So William Aarons from Guatemala City, welcome back. Clark Commando Mark, thanks for stopping by. I really much appreciate it. And Hissy Cat Studios, if I didn't get you, welcome to also our two moderators now. John Longshore, of course, who's been with us forever, and Andrew Frankie, I think it's just going to be Frankie. Let me know if I'm mispronouncing that again. I'd like to cease mispronouncing that. That would be cool. So we've got slides here tonight too. So let's start with the granddaddy of all. We're going to do these. We're going to take those sort of four sets of games and address them one at a time. And we're going to do the games in alphabetical order. So if you haven't seen one that you expect to see, it's just because it's, did I say alphabetical order? Chronological order by release date is what we're doing. So if you haven't seen something that came out recently, like say No Retreat, North African Front, it's on here. We just got to get to it. So Africa Corps 1964, this is a classic. I don't really feel like it holds up particularly well. Even in the immediate wake of its release, there were attempts to fix it. Games like the African Campaign from Jedco, which is recently released, which I don't have on this list, actually. I just missed it somehow, even though I have the game, but I forgot to put it on the list because it came out pretty recently. So very nice. Nevertheless, although I don't think this holds up particularly well, it was a lot of people's first war games. It's a very early formative experience for a lot of war gamers, and it is a classic. And I wouldn't go so far as to tell people don't ever play this, but you're going to find that it's got issues as a game, right? Like a lot of those early Avalon Hill titles do, frankly. All right, next up is Kasserine Pass. This is an oddball, really. I found this, and I'm not sure. I think I had known about this game and had kind of ignored it. This is a 1972 release from Conflict Games, which was eventually absorbed or became part of or something with Game Designers Workshop. There's a later edition from, I believe, 1977 that GDW released under their own name with presumably a less early Avalon Hill looking cover. So I don't know a whole lot about this game, and it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of discussion nowadays, but that doesn't really mean anything. There's lots of underrepresented games. By the way, as a brief digression, my sorting system at this time for Labatide and Mount St. John is to put everything in one bag, and then at the end of everything's clipped, then I'll sort it out on the cards. Because it's impossible to do as you go. I mean, it's not impossible, but it'd be a bigger pain than I want it to be. So number 3, again, in alphabetical order, originally released in Strategy and Tactics number 40. This is Panzer Army Africa. This, of course, was picked up later by Avalon Hill, one of a number of Avalon Hill games that did originate with SPI. Let me try and that works. That works. That originated with SPI. This is Jim Dunnigan design. Therefore, in my opinion, it doesn't have a great reputation nowadays. Certainly not as good a reputation as a number of other early designs on North Africa or early Jim Dunnigan designs. But nevertheless, just because this is a Jim Dunnigan design, I would be inclined to take a look at this. There's probably something real interesting going on in these mechanics. Next up is El Alamein. This is late in the Western Desert Campaign. The battles for El Alamein happen in mid-42. And this is also a Jim Dunnigan design, and it's same thing applies. I've never played this. It's very old. So and it's, it's a 1973 release, right? It's going to have primitive graphics even by, well, I don't want to say SPI standards because that makes it sound like I'm bad mouthing SPI graphical standards, which were top of the, for a number of years were best in class. I think the graphic design and how that impacted the physical components and how they impacted the physical play of the game. I think SPI was second to none, but certainly this is not one of their more evocative covers, and the map doesn't look that great either, frankly. But it's 1973. What do you want, right? So, number 5 is Tobruk. This is a very early game. This is Avalon Hill. I have this listed as 1985. I'm positive that's not the case. I think this came out earlier than that. This is not that good of a game, in my opinion. Nevertheless, it was, with some fairly significant modifications, later turned into, as we've mentioned in the chat, it was later turned into the advanced Tobruk system, which has its fans and seems to have at least, and I have not played it, so this is just me speculating here, seems to have, from what I've heard, addressed some of the larger, more glaring problems with the original Tobruk system. Captain Asparagus, Dunnigan's greatest hits. Stay tuned on that. Not this week. We're not going to handle it. I mean, talk as you will in the chat, but we're not going to cover that particular topic this week. I'm making amazing progress here on the counter clipping. So Tobruk, Avalon Hill, not I think really worth anybody's time nowadays. Number 6 is Crusader. This is a 1976 release, and it is part of the Army Group South, the North Africa Quad, 4 battles in North Africa. So this contains Crusader, which is Operation Crusader, or part of Operation Crusader, Cauldron, which is Gazala, Supercharge, which is El Alamein, and Katherine, which is the Americans not performing well in their literal baptism by fire. So one of the problems with Tobruk is it's got sluggish play because you're constantly rolling dice for stuff. Now, I will say, I don't pay $100 for a copy of Tobruk, but a lot of these old Avalon Hill things, even though I'm telling you, because that's my opinion, I don't think these are really worthwhile, and I don't think they hold up very well. They probably are worth your time to play at least once if you have the chance. A lot of these are. And I think that applies to a lot of the old SPI games as well, but maybe a lower percentage. We're going to get into some of the more recent games that folks might find a little bit more accessible nowadays. But like I said, we're going in chronological order by release. North Africa Quad, like all SPI quads, is pretty simple. It's pretty easy to play. It's got a fair number of admirers. Next is a game that we talked about when we talked about Game Designers Workshop, and this is Operation Crusader. Now, stay tuned for the later, very similarly but not identically named, and definitely not identical game from GDW. This is the early Operation Crusader. This is a 1978 release. As we mentioned at that time, this is a 5-map, 10 counter sheet monster. I don't know how well this plays, but frankly, if I can get a copy for a reasonable price, and by reasonable price, I believe I mean like less than $50, I would probably buy this. I think it would be at least a look, worth a look. And again, I believe this is a Frank Chadwick design. I didn't check that. A lot of the early GDW stuff is worth at least one play. Maybe not this though, because this is a 5 map 10 counter sheet monster game, right? This is one of GDW's early efforts at doing monster games, and this would be a project to try and play. I think that's a reasonable statement to make. Next up is 1979's legendary campaign for North Africa. This is a game that was a kind of a running, and it kind of still is a running joke in a lot of wargaming circles. And then it was on the Big Bang Theory, so prices on copies of it skyrocketed. They were always expensive. This is not a game that was released in a flat tray. This was released only in a big soapbox, as far as I'm aware. And it was a fairly valuable collector's piece even before it was on the Big Bang Theory, and now it's on the Big Bang Theory. So a lot of folks are taking a second look at Campaign for North Africa because there's a vassal module for this, right? You can find the materials for this, and it's not like you're taking money from an active publisher's pocket. Nobody's got this in print right now. So um, with modern tools like Vassal and Excel and things like that, I think we're starting to see that folks are taking this a little more seriously as a game. Um, and there's people that like this thing. And you know what? Again, I think with modern tools, it's a complete game changer, and I think it might be worth a look nowadays. But it costs like $800 to get a good condition copy, so that's a problem. Next up is Desert Fox. This is 1981 release from SPI, and this is a Richard Berg design. We'll be back on the topic of Desert Fox later on, but this is the original Richard Berg game, and it is one of the SPI S&T games that is said to hold up really well. I've never played this, but I do have Desert Fox Deluxe, which we'll talk about later on in the topic of the games that Bunny Niori, I'm going to hope that everybody's got that link. You cannot put links in the chat. It won't take it. So sorry about that. That is here for a reason. I apologize for the inconvenience. Everybody knows where to go for that stuff. After Desert Fox is Trail of the Fox. This was a follow-up published in 1984 in the TSR era, actually. And this is a Douglas Niles design. Douglas Niles has, at some point, we can't have a whole show on this, but we'll actually mention and talk about some of Douglas Niles's more known for D&D as a designer. But he had some pretty interesting war games. And this, I believe, is basically the same system as Desert Fox, but it's obviously the Tunisia campaign instead. There's also a third game called Fox Killed, but that may have been like an add-on module in Moves or something like that. Any of the TSR era S&Ts are really not very hard to get. And by hard, I mean not particularly expensive. Next up is Rommel in the Desert. This was designed by Tom Dalglish and I think a couple of other people. This is from Columbia Games. This is a block game. This is I almost said, and I know this to be not the case. It's a quite early block game, but it's not really all that close to being the first or even one of the first couple of block games. At minimum, Quebec 1859 and Napoleon came out earlier than this. Carl from the Wargame Bootcamp, very good. I appreciate you. I appreciate the support. We will be here later. We're going to try and stay laser focused on the topic until we run out of topic, and then I'll blab about whatever. But then people can tune out, and it's cool. So 128 people watching. Please remember to thumbs up the stream. It is much appreciated. So Rommel in the Desert, classic Columbia Games style block games, hidden information. This has a very good reputation. I have never played this. I think I've played East Front back in the day of this series. Obviously not. So when I'm talking about this mechanic, what I've just told you is accurate with the blocks and the hidden information and stuff like that. But East Front's, the rest of the system is pretty different. So I don't know that I can really give you a whole lot of wisdom about this in particular, other than that it is in fact pretty well regarded. Next up is the first of several Europa games that we will mention, and I have played this after a fashion. I played War in the Desert, which combines all three Europa North Africa modules together into one giant box. And we played we played Balkan Front along with that. And I had fun with this. It's got issues. I think as always with Europa, it's those are issues related to scale. But then when you finished, you got out of it, I think, a resolution of the game that kind of works. It is made to work by a lot of fiddly little rules, in some cases, laughably fiddly little rules. But of the three desert ones, the Near East is kind of an add-on for the other two, although there may be an Operation Exporter scenario in it. And we'll talk about the Near East in a couple minutes. Western Desert is the best regarded of that because it covers the most time, right? Remember, Europa is only 2 turns per month. So something like Tunisia is really only like 6 turns long or something like that. It's probably longer than that. It's probably more like 12 turns long, something like that. Western Desert, this campaign goes on for quite a while, and there's a lot of potential for back and forth. And we saw some of that in our relatively recent game of it. You can also get Western Desert or Torch for not too much money. Certainly cheaper than War in the Desert. So if you want to try the Europa system, this isn't my first recommendation, but it's not a terrible choice. Next up is following up on Operation Crusader, the earlier game from GDW. This is 8th Army Operation Crusader, the later game from GDW. And this is part of their Double Blind series. This is a 1984 release. Interesting cover. Dave Dietrich art, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly looks like a Dave Dietrich cover. And I love Dave Dietrich's art. I think he is better remembered for Traveler stuff, but he did a bunch of war game covers back in the day as well. Kent Smith mentions Mare Nostrum. So a couple of things on this. It's not on the list because I forgot about it. And it didn't show up in any of my like reports that I ran out of BGG to try and pick up every meaningful game. I do have a TSWW game in here, but it's not this one. This game is enormous. It's so huge. And it's like the entire Mediterranean. It covers absolutely like the Greece and Italy and all that stuff. So it is, I would not characterize Captain Asparagus. I would not characterize the Second World War as a strategic series. I would characterize it as an extremely well padded out operational series. It's really operational. It's really not a strategic game unless you're playing the whole thing, and we're not there yet. So there's things to like about it. There's things to dislike about it. At some point, I'll do a little more on TSWW. Brent McCabe, thanks very much. Much appreciated. So for example, Western Desert is 2 maps, right? And the GDW maps were not as like big as the regular map. So it's roughly about the same table footprint as one modern standard sized war game map. It's not that big. And if you have War in the Desert, you can kind of peel it apart and play just Torch or just Western Desert or just the Near East if you want, although I don't know why anybody would want to do that. So Mark McNair mentions Africa Oriental. So there's 2 games on this topic, one of which is at a very different scale. Okay, so now I remember, now that I think about it. There's Africa Oriental, which appeared in S&T, actually, and I have it. And it is a Europa-like game. It is very similar to Europa, but it doesn't really link with Europa. It's a different scale. It's quite different. Now, if you really want Europa scale, East Africa, what you need is Wavel's War, which is, I believe, the very last, or one of the very last things for Europa that ever came out. What that basically does is allows you to A, do all of East Africa, and B, link War in the Desert with Balkan Front, which is why I wanted it. I do have it. It was not cheap. So this is possible, but I should have thought, truthfully, I should have thought of this. John, I looked at your Mare Nostrum. That's how I'm like, oh my God, I was like pulling maps out for 8 minutes. Just pulling map. Here's another map. There's a map. Oh, 5 more maps. Oh my God, there's so many maps in here. Holy God. So it's really big, man. It's really big. So Eighth Army Operation Crusader, and this is pretty much all of Operation Crusader as far as I can tell, which is November December 1941. So it may start midway through that, but it's pretty much just Operation Crusader. Rommel's War from Quarterdeck Games. Now I had this back in the day, got rid of it, and a lot of people, not very many people, because it was from Quarterdeck Games after all. This is a 1985 release that was later re-released by L2, and I gotta tell you, I like the original Roger McGowan cover a lot better. This is supposed to be a really good game. I had it. I really don't remember anything in particular about it, but like I said, I hadn't really played very much in the way of North African games until relatively recently. We get some more counters here because I'm 30 minutes in and I'm out of counters. I didn't really expect that to happen. Again, Quarterdeck Games, not the most prolific publisher, but they had a couple of things that were kind of interesting. And this is a Vance von Voorhees design. Now his is a name that will come up a number of additional times here because a bunch of these games that I found are in fact Vance von Voorhees designs, and I think there's a tendency now to think of von Voorhees as an East Front designer because he's very well known for that with the East Front system and the Rhodes games from GMT, which are the Rhodes games are fabulous. The East Front series I think is good, but I don't like it as much as I like OCS. But I play tons of OCS, so there's that. I didn't get a lot of magazine games in this list either. I'll give you fair. There's a couple, and a couple that aren't in that are magazine games that didn't appear in S&T that appeared in other magazines. There are a couple in here, but there's not a lot. A lot of those games are relatively obscure, and several of those games are Vance von Voorhees designs. Let me point that out as well. So after Rommel's War, we have Rommel in North Africa. This is a West End Games release. This is from 1986, and this is from the pretty well-esteemed designer John Southard. John Southard was, as I recall, the designer of Carrier and a number of other interesting things from Victory Games, and Compass Games has him working on some stuff now, so we're all glad he's coming back. Rommel in North Africa has its fans. It's not a game I hear a lot about. However, one thing I'll point out is that a whole bunch of these games, particularly the Western Desert ones, have really similar titles, right? We've got Rommel's War, Rommel in the Desert, Rommel in North Africa. There's more. So it's really easy to get these mixed up unless you have actually played them. Doug Sunseth mentions Rick Atkinson's book, An Army at Dawn, which is supposed to be very good. I have one of the three, and I don't remember which one, even though I pulled all the books out of the boxes not too long ago. So obviously haven't read it yet. So I did leave East Africa off this list, even though I probably should have, thinking about it, I probably should have also either included East Africa or dropped off the Near East stuff in British and French Palestine as well. But I did not. So OSGs, did we pick that up already? Yeah. So Mike Anthony, we're not on Tunisia yet. That is on the list. We'll talk about that in a second. I don't have a lot to tell you about it, but that is on the list. So next after Rommel in North Africa is Africa. This is a Dean Essig design. It is from the Gamers. There are two different editions of this. And do I have both of them separately on the list? I don't. But the second version was the original was a 1993 release from the Gamers, and the second version was a 2006 game from MMP. So this is very well regarded, and this is the Western Desert campaign. Even though it says Africa, and you might think, oh, it covers all of North Africa. It doesn't. It covers the Western Desert campaign. We got a wee bit of registration issues on these things, by the way. That's a bit irritating. So waiting for the comment. There we go. Perfidious Albion. So this is not, I mean, this is kind of true, but the really analogous SCS version of DAC is the North Africa game that was released, I believe, last year. That is very similar to DAC in scale. And in fact, it may be identical to DAC in scale, where this is like a one or maybe two map game. This is a much smaller game. So yes, but if that is what you were looking for, if you're like, hey, I'd love to play DAC, but I don't want to deal with OCS, I'd rather deal with SCS, you might want to look at the newer North Africa game, which is also big, and also has scenarios, not all of which are huge, and is going to be easier to run down than this. These are reasonably collectible. I don't see these going super duper cheap. Am I full of shit on that? I might be. I don't know. I haven't priced this thing out, so maybe don't quote me on the relative third party value on this. Next up is The Legend Begins. This is a game from Rhino Games, which I could swear I did, and I didn't do the legwork. I could swear I had something from Rhino Games at some point, but I don't remember what it was, and I didn't look to see what else they did. So this is a Mark Simonich design, and it is being redone by Mark and GMT under the name North Africa 40 to 42 or something like that. So I'll be very interested in, and it's sort of a predecessor to the Zokbon series, but it doesn't use the Zokbon rule, and the new one won't either, from what I hear. Nevertheless, I think Mark is an excellent designer, and I am looking forward to seeing whatever he would like to do from anybody, really. But I know that this is a game that a lot of people do remember. The Battle for North Africa, War in the Desert, 1940 to 42. Once again, this is the Western Desert campaign. It's a Richard Berg design. It's from GMT. It's a chip pull system. Chip pull is a mechanic that Richard Berg seemed to like quite a bit. And this is another example as he continued to experiment with that mechanic. The Duck Overlord asks, why is Rommel's name used so much in North African games? Like you don't see tons of games called Manstein's Blank. So I'm not familiar with Kleist in the name of any war games, but I've seen Manstein at least twice. There's a game called Manstein's War, I believe, and there's a game called von Manstein's Triumph, which is a pretty recent release from, I think, White Dog Games. And there's von Manstein's Backhand Blow from GMT. So we do see that elsewhere, but we do see Rommel's name a lot because he is a romanticized figure, I suspect, part of sort of the mystique of the Western Desert campaign specifically, and he's in Tunisia too, remember. But part of the mystique of the Western Desert campaign is sort of the back and forth, and Rommel as this sort of dashing and more honorable than your average Nazi commander that even got relatively positive press from Churchill himself in at least a couple of statements. So Rommel is a one of the, I think when you look at World War II, he's like one of the names that immediately come to mind in the leadership of the various powers. I'd say Patton is up there too. Montgomery, maybe if you're British. And that other guy whose name we don't want to talk about because we're not going to get demonetized. So it's a marketing thing, to be honest. This is true too. And that's part of the romanticization, right? Rommel never shows up in a movie. He's like there in the background somewhere, and I think he does for momentarily, doesn't he? I could be wrong about that. But he does not have an actual significant presence in the movie. I've seen Guderian get mentioned in a few titles as well. Monty has been mentioned in a few titles. Eisenhower has been mentioned in a few titles. Bradley has been mentioned in a few titles. Nimitz has. Not sure if Garibaldi or Balbo have gotten mentioned, but we should have those too, right? Equal opportunity and all that. This is true too. This did serve a propaganda purpose during the war. Which is not the topic tonight, right? But it's one of the reasons Rommel, the presence of Rommel, and where he kind of made his name as this romantic commander, was in this Western Desert campaign, and that is part of why Western Desert campaigns are so popular. And we are just slightly over halfway through this list of Western Desert games by themselves. I need some scotch. There we go. So this is a thing that I'm not sure this was well known at the time, but it became known later. I mean, that wasn't the official story. The official story was it was a war wound, um, and not that he said you're going to kill yourself or we're going to kill your family, to Rommel, which is pretty much how it happened. All right. So after the battle for North Africa, we have Crusader. Now, this is once again Western Desert campaign. I think this is a DNSig design as well. This is a 1997 release, and I do not know to what extent it is just a re-implementation of Africa. But it's also an SCS game. And all the SCS games have a decent following, a decent excuse me, a decent reputation. So any of these SCS titles is, for one thing, easy to play. Probably doesn't cost $1 million, and is probably worth your time. So next up, we have a back-to-back DAC, Desert Africa Core, the Gamers DNSig Design 1997 in this first edition, and then 2004 in the second edition from MMP. The differences, but now I play a lot of OCS, but I have not played DAC. The differences between the two are relatively minor enough that you can, if you have a copy of DAC 1, you can go get the rules from Gamers Archive for DAC 2 and play DAC 2 with the DAC 1 components. There is some fiddling that you have to do because there are some changes, but you can basically do that. So the differences between the two editions are not huge. There is what I would characterize as a relatively minor graphical upgrade to the map and counters. The map pretty much looks the same, but the counters are a little better in the second version, I think. This is, as far as I can remember, the last OCS game where there were really kind of significant contrast problems on certain counters. Not all of them, but on some of them, there are some contrast issues on some of the counters in DAC, and that's unfortunate. It's supposed to be really good. It's a 5-map game. It's a big game. Counter density is not super duper high, but it's also 5 maps. So if you like OCS and you like North Africa, this may end up being your definitive North Africa experience in DAC, right? The system will, I believe, work very well for this campaign. Next is a game that came up at the end of my search. This is Toten Sonntag, Dead Sunday, from Lock and Load Publishing, and this is a Peter Bogdasarian game design released in 2007. And so I have this tendency, and I've talked about this before, to kind of miss a Lock and Load stuff because so much of what they do is tactical stuff, and I'm not really super interested in more World War II tactical or near future or whatever tactical stuff. This is a battalion level game and is therefore kind of operational. So this, you should be able to get a copy of it. It's not a huge game. I believe it's 1 map, 1 counter sheet. And this is Sidi Rejeg. This is an interesting battle later on in the campaign. This counter is not square. Damn it, Clash of Arms. Stigler's cat just decked on the rug. That is unfortunate. This is this is what they tell us, right? They had a pile of DAC 2 sitting in the warehouse, and they were trying to unload them for like $25 a piece, and now it goes for $300 or $400 or $500. So this is possible. I don't know this because I've never owned DAC 1. DAC 1 was like coming out, or was this Sicily? I think it was Sicily, Triumph and Folly, was like coming out when I kind of stopped buying war games. Ken X or Ken 10, we are clipping Labatide Mount St. John again. We're going to be clipping this for a while. The card is covered up by the slideshow. So Toten Sonntag from Lock and Load looks pretty interesting, actually. Beta Fom from this is another battle that's part of Operation Compass. This is, so it's early 1941, and this is a design by Frank Chadwick, actually. And I'm not sure if this is a redo of an earlier GDW game or not. It might well be. This is from Consim Press. Nobody knows what the status of Consim Press is right now, so I can't comment on it. Maybe I'll have John Kranz on and he can talk about that, but I don't want to make John uncomfortable either. So we're not going to. I would imagine that he is in fact referring to that particular symbol. Yes. So thank you for not mentioning it in the chat. Vince Reese says that it is a remake of a GDW 120 game. So that does not surprise me at all. This is a relatively small game. It's pretty interesting battle, though. This is when Wavell is in charge still, so he goes away after Operation Battle Axe. Next up is Operation Scorpion. This is Halfaya Pass, 1941. This is from Compass, and I think this is Advanced Von Borey's design. Am I wrong about that? I think I'm wrong about that. Because there's another one on this list that is Advanced Von Borey's design, and looks a lot like this. This is a pretty early release from Compass. This is from 2013. They may still have this in stock. I don't know, but the game looks nice. I can tell you that. Next up is No Retreat, the North African Front. I've never owned this. I've owned 3 other games in the No Retreat series. I currently own the Russian front one. I find it a bit impenetrable, to be completely honest. But I'm sure if I played it with somebody who knew what they were doing, I could figure it out. But me trying to noodle around in it on my own was not a successful endeavor. So Stigler says Donnerschlag may have ripped off Operation Scorpion's cover. I suspect both are in fact inspired by period propaganda posters. I think that's closer to the truth. Mark McNair says Operation Scorpion is in stock, and I'm pretty sure that it's not Advanced Von Borey's game, but one other one that we're going to get to in a minute is. I also tried No Retreat, the Italian front, as well, because I'm super interested in that topic, and it's one of the few games that covers the whole thing. But I did not succeed in penetrating it. So there's that. This is Carl Parody design from GMT. It's the whole series has its fans. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying I couldn't figure it out. Next is from Revolution Games. This is a Mike Ranella game, Operation Battle Axe. As far as I can tell, this was originally published by Command Magazine in Japan and then was brought over by Revolution Games. So what the deal is on that, I'm not really sure. Nor can I tell you a whole lot about the game, other than that it's Charlie Kibler graphics, so it probably looks pretty nice. And everything I've got from Revolution Games looks pretty nice, I'll tell you that. So this may be like a lot of these sort of quite focused games that Revolution tends to do. This may be worth a look. Next up is our TSWW entry, also called Operation Battle Axe. Now this is, this is probably a 2-turn game, maybe a 3-turn game. And it's kind of a demo module for the Second World War series from Diffraction Entertainment. This is a 2016 release. I don't believe this is available anymore, but maybe they brought it back. I don't know. But if you, at one point, at least, if you were inclined to investigate this system, this was what to get, because it was like the only thing that was like not much more than $100. I forget the actual price, but we know that their games are quite expensive. There's a lot there. I mean, I'm not saying even that it's not worthwhile if you like that system. But their games are, I think nobody would argue, expensive. This was only released in a Ziploc as far as I know. They may, however, have like an electronic version, which they call it like the Colonel's Edition or something like that. So you may be able to get this from them in the electronic, version and print it yourself. And I think print and play is rather a pain in the ass. So I kind of steer away from that in most cases. There is a couple exceptions that I would consider making, but they're not war games, actually. The one exception I'd consider is Barbarian Prince from Dwarf Star. I'd consider making and there is a print and play version of that. I'd consider making one of those, but not this, not war games. But if you are so inclined and want to do that and don't want to save some money, then maybe you can pick up the print and play version. Ken Smith says that Operation Battle Axe, presumably the previous Operation Battle Axe, is area movement, which, doesn't really surprise me either. Next up, and we're closing in on the end of the Western Desert list. This is the Dark Sands War in North Africa, 1940 to 42. This is Ted Racer design, pretty recent design from Ted and GMT. It uses the Dark system, which is a chip pull system with a number of interesting and somewhat idiosyncratic features. I don't know how well it will work for this, but it worked really well in the Dark Valley, and I see no reason why it wouldn't work well for this. What this does have, however, which I think is a bit of a turnoff to some people, is that it does not have a single contiguous map. It actually breaks the map up into, I think, 3 or maybe 4 different sections, one of which is at a different scale than the other ones, I think. And that it presents, I think, a little bit of so on the one hand, I think that does suck out a bit of the visual appeal. But on the other hand, an issue that a lot of North Africa games have, including Africa Core and Western Desert, is a scale issue where they've chosen, in order to be able to fit it all in one map, they've chosen to kind of move the scale up such that they can do that, and they've kind of removed a lot of interesting tactical nuance in the meantime. That's how I felt about Western Desert after we had finished that. I'm like, well, we just kind of bashed each other back and forth here. There was some, we did some combats. You rebuilt everything in 1 or 2 turns, and then we just did it again. And Ted's choice to do the cutaway maps and sort of abstractly separate the different areas where the action takes place, potentially at least, allows him to solve that problem. But then when we get to the next game in the series, the scale is such that that is in fact not a problem. And that game is Brazen Chariots. Now, I have played this. This is an amazing game. And if you want to see live play of it, with the caveat that we made a bunch of mistakes and we're using the earlier version of the rules, which are just not as good as the current version of the rules, there is gameplay video of this on the channel. So do check that out. I have a very, very high opinion of BCS at this exact moment. I'm very much enjoying, and we're playing with the current rules, last Blitzkrieg. And frankly, I want to get back to Brazen Chariots. So this says Battles for Tobruk, but this covers basically the whole second half of 1941. This covers Operation Brevity, Battle Axe, and Crusader. So there's a lot of, as is often the case with the gamers stuff, and remember, they're still kind of a distinct entity within MMP. As is often the case with the gamers, there's a lot of value in the package. There's multiple campaigns. There's I think 2 different mini campaigns, or you can play the whole Operation Crusader thing. And this thing plays pretty, if you've got the hang of BCS already, you're not looking stuff up every 5 minutes. This plays quite briskly. So strongly if you are interested in this topic, and if you are, you're probably interested in this topic more than I am, this comes highly recommended. And then last, on the North Africa or the Western Desert front, we have North Africa from the gamers and DNESIG and MMP. So this is the SCS game I mentioned earlier as a more direct analog of DAC using the SCS system. Basically, what you are cutting out is all the OCS stuff, right? And one of the 5 maps. So this is a 4-map game. They're going to line up, along the coast of North Africa in the Western Desert. I have tended in the past not to particularly like large SCS games. But there's a couple I haven't tried, and this is one of those that I haven't tried. So hell, I'd be willing to give this a shot. PWKZ5 mentions No Question of Surrender, which I actually also didn't put on this list. That is a GTS game, Grand Tactical Series. It's kind of the mini Grand Tactical Series, and I forget what battle it is, but it's Italians in North Africa. It is a straight tactical engagement, though, which is probably why it didn't come up on any of my searches. Nevertheless, I do think it is a fair inclusion on this list, and it's another one that I probably just should have had on there. Jeff Taylor says that North Africa is his favorite SCS game. Good to hear. So now you just got to bring it over and we can play it. That'd be cool. Okay, so that's pretty much my list of Western Desert games. And we're still, Stigler's going off on Desert Fox Deluxe, and we're not even talking about Desert Fox Deluxe yet. We will get to it. It's got its own entry in this list. So the next sort of phase or sector or whatever you want to call it of the North Africa in World War II topic is what I'm calling torch through Tunisia. So we're talking about the torch landings of American and British troops in November of 1942, all the way through to the fall of Tunisia and Algeria in May or so of 1943, not long after which Tunisia served as the launching pad for the Allied invasion of Sicily in July of 1943. So the earliest game I have on this topic is this one, Rommel and Tunisia. This is from OSG, the Operational Studies Group, and it's designed by J.A. Nelson, who was, I think, has a couple of SPI credits or had a couple of SPI credits as well. It's not a Kevin Zucker design, which you might think, if you're familiar with OSG, it's like 90% of what they've done to date has been Kevin Zucker's designs. But that's not the case here. It's a J.A. Nelson design. I don't know a lot about this, but it is the fight for Tunisia. Next up is the Europa entry on this topic, which is Torch, which covers it says 1942 to 43, which is right. It's gonna cover I want to say end of May, because remember we played this not that long ago. It could be end of June, but I think it's end of May 1943 is when this ends, and it's going to start in what we would call 1 November, so the first of the 2 November turns of 1942. This is a pretty good game. The terrain kind of sucks. You're gonna pay to move forward. If you move the allies forward in an uncoordinated way, you will be behind schedule. So it demands a little more careful maneuver than a lot of other Europa games do. And that's actually a good thing. But then again, it's like you don't necessarily, that's not necessarily emphasized as much in a whole pile of other Europa games either. So it's simultaneously nice, but would have loved to have seen more of that. But the answer to that is to play something else. Frankly, there's many options. After Torch, we start to get into the plethora of Vance von Voorhees designs. This is a Decision at Katherine. This was so there's a couple of these that, and one or two of them ended up getting reprinted by Compass, and I got confused when I was doing the research for this. But this one definitely got redone by Compass because they used the exact same cover. This is a pretty well regarded game, or early Wargamer issue number 23. This is the only entry from Wargamer magazine on this list. Zucker does have a credit in there. He's just not the designer. That's absolutely true. This is a fabulous price. $36 for Brazen Chariots. There's a lot of value in that game if you like BCS or you're interested in the topic. And $35 or $36 is an absolutely bananas price. Histocat Studios, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Jeff Beeler says that the French setups in Torch is very scripted. That sounds right. I didn't play the Americans. I was playing the Germans in that game, but from the noises of frustration emanating from our German player, I believe that to be an accurate statement. And as Mark McNair points out, this game in a new edition, much fancier than other than the cover. It is a good cover. I like the cover. Is available from Compass, and it should still be available from Compass. It was released not that long ago. Next up is the 1984 3W release, Rommel at Bay. This is, I would be shocked. No, it is in fact a Roger McGowan cover. I'm not surprised. This is a Vance von Voorhees design as well, and I think this one is one that hasn't been reprinted. But then you think, well, it's a 3W design. God only knows who's got the rights to this thing. Bloody Katherine. This is, one of those mid 90s GGW covers that we sort of made fun of on the GGW show. This is Rommel Hits the Yanks. And this is a 1992 release. So not really not really mid 90s, but early 90s. So Can't really tell you a lot about this either, to be completely honest. The next one up is going to be Race for Tunis, which I want to say these use the same system. And in fact, I think you can link the two games. I might be wrong about that, but it would be um, appropriate if that were to be the case. So next up is another BCS game. There's going to be, well, these are the only two BCS games in here. There's Ariete, which I also left off the list, by the way. Ariete is the latest in the TCS series from the gamers, and I don't know who the designer was, but it series designed by Dean Essig. That was released a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and there's at least a few people who've got it to the table. And the TCS series still does have fans, right? I've got one TCS game. I'd like to play it someday, but it's not at the top of the list, which is why it still isn't done. And then next is Katherine Rommel's Battle for Tunisia. This is a 2001 release by Vance von Voorhees, and somehow I have absolutely idiotically left off. I'll talk about it anyway right now. Tunisia and Tunisia 2 from the gamers and OCS. Those are Dean Essig games, and I have played the second Tunisia 2. Jeff Beeler, welcome back to the stream. Ooh, Compass has Decision to Katherine on sale. There you go. Baptism by Fire is a little light. I found it somewhat, when I did my first BCS with Baptism by Fire, and we found it a little unsatisfying, but I'd kind of like to circle back to it because we, I know we messed up a bunch of rules. This was prior to the Brazen Chariot stream, and it was definitely the earlier rules at the time. So I'd love to go back to that now with a better understanding of how BCS works and how it flows, and using the updated rules. That may well make a difference for Baptism by Fire, but it is fairly lean, right? It's just Katherine pretty much. So there's that. And then we left. I don't have a picture of Tunisia 2 or Tunisia from the OCS series, but those are good games. A pretty good starting point for OCS if you want to start playing OCS. There's things it won't teach you because there's no, as I recall, there's no hedgehogs and there's no extenders in Tunisia, at least Tunisia 2. And so you're not going to explore those angles, but nevertheless, it's still a good game. The formation stripes come into BCS with Brazen Chariots, game 3 in the series. So the game that is hurt the most in the series, so there's 2 games in the series that don't have formation stripes. Last Blitzkrieg, which is Battle of the Bulge, the big 4-map game, and Baptism by Fire. By far, Last Blitzkrieg is hurt more by the lack of formation stripes. And while it would be an improvement for there to be formation stripes on those counters, 2 turns in, we really haven't had any problems with it. We just have to kind of correct and we have had to do this a couple of times, have had to correct ourselves a couple of times to make sure that we don't screw that up. Because the counters in some cases look the same, or you'll see like an SS division, which is in black, right next to Fallschirmjäger or Volksgrenadier division, which is in gray. But there'll be like the one unit that's part of the SS formation that's gray instead of black, and you'll move it accidentally along with the Luftwaffe or whatever other units you're moving. So you do have to pay careful attention, and unquestionably, that is a thing that they should have put in from day one. They were already doing that and had been doing that for many years in OCS. I don't know what, and it's way more. I don't know that it's more important necessarily, but every unit is part of not every unit. There are independent units, but almost every unit is part of a formation in BCS, and that's not true with OCS. So yes, I agree and cannot argue with that. Okay, and then we have the short part of the category here, the Near Eastern stuff. I'm going to start again in chronological order. 1983 from GDW, the Near East. As far as I know, this is just like a kit that adds on to the other games. I don't know if this has any standalone scenarios in it on its own. I don't own it. I've never owned it. I have it as part of War in the Desert. it'll be a little bit difficult to extract that information from my copy of War in the Desert at this time. But this is, Turkey and Syria, Palestine, and Iraq, and what looks like part of Iran at the time. Next is, I'm sorry, this is the best image I could find. Slouch Hats and Eggshells. This is a game from Legion War Games from 2011. And this actually passed through my hands at one point, and I forgot that this was about Operation Exporter and is not, in fact, a Boer War thing. I don't know why I thought that. So Operation Exporter is the British operation in Palestine to take some key sites in French, what is then the Vichy French parts of Palestine. The next game on our list covers this in detail as well. Reluctant Enemies. This is an OCS game by Curtis Bear as the designer. I've played this. This is a very good game. It was pitched explicitly as an introductory SCS game or OCS game. So it's got like a whole little getting started with OCS guide in it, which is available for download on gamersarchive.net or .com or whatever it is. So this is a very nice one map game that I think that, except for teaching purposes, that I think that most OCS players will not end up coming back to, because you're gonna look at the map and even if you're new, you're gonna figure out pretty soon that, hey, there's these 3 ways I could attack. I got to pick one or pick 2 or however I'm going to do it. And it is hard to get, and it goes for more money than it should, and I have no ability to affect that whatsoever. Forgotten Legions. This is a designer signature series entry from Compass Games, designer Vance Van Boris, and this reprints Drive on Damascus and Bloody Karen, which are 2 games in this vicinity in the Torch to Tunisia space by Vance Van Boris, redone by Compass. I haven't looked at this particular game, but it's certainly nice. That is actually why I didn't include these 2 particular games earlier in the list, because here it is, Forgotten Legions, and I think you can still get this from Compass as well, if I'm not mistaken. Part of the reason Smolensk is the go-to game is because you can get Smolensk, right? It's in print, you can get it, and it's not hideously expensive. So that's part of the reason there. I think if Reluctant Enemies was still available, then I think it would still be the go-to entry-level game. It just isn't particularly available. And then we have 4 games that cover all of North Africa from the mid to late 1940. It's either hostilities start in, I think, May of 1940, but the invasion doesn't happen until September of 1940, June of 1940. So that's when these games really start happening. So there's only 4 games that I noted that cover the whole thing at anything less than a really abstract level. One is War in the Desert. This is from Games Research and Design. This is a compilation of the 3 previous games with significantly changed and significantly fatter rules. You could play out everything all the way from, Damascus all the way to Tunis. Or Casablanca would be a better example, actually, using the maps in this thing. It doesn't line up exactly straight, so good luck on the table space. But really? That's a big wow. Holy cow. That is an interesting design decision on somebody's part. Let me tell you. So again, I've played War in the Desert. We've played basically the whole thing. It's got all the suite of Europa problems, but at the same time, it's kind of fun to play and moves parts of it, at least. The Tunisia part moved pretty sluggishly for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot more forces in the theater at that point. And there's a lot more air in the theater at that point. And Europa really, West Front Europa, not East Front, but East Front too, really. Europa really bogs down in the air system. I mean, where we got 2 combats. We got to make 80 die rolls. Oh my God. It takes half an hour to resolve this one combat. So you're 24 minutes before you even got to the combat. So next up is Shifting Sands. This is, I believe, I didn't write this down, but I believe this is a Mike Ranella design. This is a 2006 release from MMP. I've seen this on a table. I haven't played it. I've never owned it. This appears to me to be a point-to-point card-based war game, more or less based on the Paths of Glory model, which I think probably sounds fine. I'm actually supposed to play Paz Glory this week. So that will be interesting. And a lot of people do like this game. Like I said, I saw this on a table at Winter Offensive, if I'm not mistaken. So there's folks playing. And Winter Offensive is dominated by specific games, right? ASL, GCACW, OCS, BCS. This was nevertheless on a table at Winter Offensive. So there's definitely fans of this thing. Next up is ramping up the suspense for Mr. Stigler. Next up is Blocks in Africa. This is from Vento Nuovo. I know very little about this other than that it is a block game in North Africa. It may be linkable with Blocks in the East and Blocks in the West. I'm not sure. And it is a pretty game. I know that. I believe it's an area movement map. These games are pretty well regarded, but they also seem to have a lot of persistent buzz, and that may be due to availability. That's a possibility. Because I never really saw after the initial releases of these games, I never really saw them anywhere for sale, and I still don't see them very often. Now, on the other hand, there's a couple reasons for that. One of which may be that the people who own it already don't want to get rid of it, which speaks well for the game, right? The Thin Red Line 1985 games are like that. I don't even see them going up for sale very often. And Lord knows the speculators could make a killing on those things. So again, great cover too, by the way. Blocks in Africa from Vento Nuovo. And lastly, Desert Fox Deluxe, the legendary title from Decision Games. This is a combination, originally appearing in S&T issue number 300 of Desert Fox, the Richard Berg game, Trail of the Fox, and then I think Fox Triumphant or Fox Killed, which together on a contiguous but really goofy map that like snakes all up and down the North African coast covers the entire conflict in North Africa. I believe there to be a good game here. I also believe that good game, there are some challenges to extracting it, which would be completely in character for Decision Games. It was later released in a boxed version, which is the one I have. The boxed version does have some play improvements, like the setup cards and stuff, but it also doesn't give you a particularly good explanation of how those things work, and that is irritating. Nevertheless, like I said, I think there's a good game here. There's a fair number of scenarios. You don't have to play the whole game, the whole like contiguous map at once. I mean, these things happen kind of sequentially, right where the action starts on the eastern side of this thing, and then gradually moves west, and then back east, and then west, and then back east again. And then at some point, you'll have the invasion of Tunisia up in the north, which is where the other parts of the game start. So you don't have to necessarily play on this big, huge, jagged map. This is so what have I missed? Right, that's because I know I've mentioned things that folks have already mentioned, and the one that I forgot, which was Tunisia and Tunisia 2. Triumph and Fall of the Desert Fox from Udo Grebe Games. I am not at all familiar with this. And it may well have appeared on one of the lists, but I couldn't cover absolutely everything. It does kind of look like that, doesn't it? I have to admit that it does. So Field Commander Rommel is not just North Africa, though. It's got a campaign in France, and I think there's a Normandy campaign in it as well. So remember that Rommel first rose to prominence in the 1940 campaign in France. Nevertheless, so that was kind of my excuse for, and I did think of Field Commander Rommel while I was brainstorming this thing, but I'll talk about my back stiffness problem in a second. But I didn't include it because it's not just North Africa. So we went to Cedar Point, big amusement park up in Sandusky, Ohio, over the weekend, and I did about almost 16,000 steps. My back did not feel bad Sunday, the day after. Today it feels very stiff. We rode some rides. I rode some rides I shouldn't have ridden, including some big swingy thing that like hangs you upside down, face down, 300 feet in the air. That was dumb. Won't go on that again. So most of the day I exercised better sense than that. Malta Besieged. So, well, I mean, this is exactly why I didn't include it on this list. I do think that there's enough games in the States of Siege series that I could probably do an entire episode talking about them. But the number of States of Siege games that I've played is two. So I have several more, and I'd like, or maybe three. I have several more, and I would like to play more States of Siege games. But the fact is, I don't really do that much solitaire stuff, and they are all by definition solitaire games. Oh, it's super, super, super commercialized. Absolutely. Um, so I have heard I've already been to the chiropractor 5 times for the back problem, but that was before Cedar Point. I do have a follow up, I think, in about 2 weeks. So yeah, we'll go back. We'll let them crack it again, and then I'm probably not going back until I have another problem. So we will see about that. Rommel did write a book, Infantry Tactics, which was published before World War II, and which was read relatively widely in Britain during World War II. Um, it is Infantry Attacks is the title, actually, and that is why there is a Panzer Grenadier World War One module, I believe, called Infantry Attacks, and it is called that for that reason. If you like roller coasters specifically or thrill rides more broadly, Cedar Point is the best place. Although the one roller coaster was shut down because some bolts fell off of it, and then now they got to tear it down. So there's that. Um, I mean, we avoided this where we could. Our longest wait was about 45 minutes, and that was for a ride called the Gatekeeper, which is a coaster. And it would have been about 25 minutes, except that somebody threw up on the ride and they had to hose the car down. So that represented about a 15 or so minute delay. Um, so I think, like I said, I got a lot of the highlights here, but there's certainly some corner cases like things like Field Commander Rommel that I didn't talk about very much. At this point, I have no counters to clip. I've still got whiskey to drink, so we're good on that. This is a great line. I think we can all agree this is in fact a great line. No, I hurt my back moving on Labor Day weekend, but we went to I just walked like a lot on Saturday, and I was okay yesterday. I did a fair amount of moving around. By the way, I would like anybody to tell me, anybody that hears any kind of echo in this stream, please say something in the chat. Because this is a great question, John Stanley. We'll get to this in a second. Because I think I've pretty much finished putting up soundproofing towels. So any wood surface in this room that's not the ceiling now has a soundproofing towel on it. Even I guess I could put another couple down here toward the floor. But I even cut around the light switch to put acoustic tiles all over here. So I can't audibly detect any echo anymore in this room. And it was pretty echoey out in the game room right now. It's pretty echoey. I think that we will wait till we get the shelves up in that room and then see what the echo situation sounds like. I may be able to address it by just buying a carpet or something like that. I don't know. So thanks everybody for the feedback on the sound and the lack of echo. So naval games on North Africa. So the problem with this is that they had a lot of trouble dragging the boats through the desert. So other than that, there are a fair number of Mediterranean games. And actually, there's a couple examples I can think of, like the Italian Frogmen game from David Thompson, which may be a solitaire game. There's North Africa stuff in that because the harbor at Alexandria is one of the harbors that the Italians snuck into with the Frogmen and blew up a British battleship. Um, there are a number of games on the Ethiopian campaign. One was mentioned, Lion of Judah, that there was I believe a Command Magazine gamer back in the day and was redone by Compass a few years ago. That game has a fairly good reputation, I believe. But I don't. There were some people playing at a Compass Expo, I think the year before last, or because who knows with COVID, I am having trouble keeping track of that. But um, by Stealth NC is the game that I'm thinking of, the Frogmen game. or human torpedoes, or whatever you want to call them. There are a decent number of games about Malta. We mentioned one a week or two ago on the Legion Games pre-order list, the Invasion Malta game from Vance von Voorhees. That looks like it's pretty good, actually. I'd be very curious to try that. Many of the OCS games, I'm trying to remember if there's naval units in Tunisia. I'm not sure that there are. There are definitely naval units in both Sicily games, though. So I think one of these two actually sank, though. Um, and I don't recall which one off the top of my head. John C. from the sunny Philippines. So it rained basically all day yesterday, which was fine because we weren't walking around anymore. And today it's just chilly, and it's rained a little bit, but who cares at that point? So at some point, we may tackle the Mediterranean as a topic, and I'll bring that up. There may be a poll at some point as well, but we'll have to organize that. I am interested in input as to what folks would like to see as topics. Now, I think there's some topics that folks have suggested in the past that maybe are not great fits for this particular stream. But nevertheless, we do have a 15th birthday stream coming up on. So I haven't decided exactly what that's going to look like yet, but I may do a long stream on Saturday the 22nd. We'll see exactly how that works. That may include some live gameplay. It will not be live gameplay of something huge. One of the things that I noted as a possibility for that would be AeroCore, actually, for folks, because folks are asking me now that I've been playing BCS again to show some BCS gameplay. And I feel like I have a considerably stronger grasp on the BCS mechanics now than I did back at the time. So the eastern U.S. is partially paralyzed by a hurricane, something as well. So both of these ships, I believe, got refloated. But yeah, they were out of action for a long time. And strangely enough, the British become upset when you sink their battleships. So La Regia Marina, this is an interesting one. So naval stuff. There's a number of naval Mediterranean games that I can think of. There's MedWar, which I have, which ties into the Italian campaign series that Decision did quite a few years ago now in S&T, and that's not got a good reputation. There's another one which I believe is yet another game called Mare Nostrum. So the I realize the historical precedent of calling games about the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, but nevertheless, there's like 7 war games called Mare Nostrum, and it's super confusing at this point, and a couple of outright fantasy games called Mare Nostrum. There's no reason for a fantasy game to be called that. It is a Latin phrase that basically means our sea because they controlled the entire Mediterranean basin at that point. So Stuka Joe appears to have, I guess a lot of Puerto Rico's out of power. Stuka Joe appears to have power because he was live streaming last night. So hopefully everything's okay with Joe. This is true too. There's a lot of sort of fleet and being occurring in the Med where the Italians don't want to actually sail because then they might get sunk. This is essentially true. So there's less action in the Med than you'd necessarily think on a larger scale. There's some small naval stuff in the Med, and I can tell you that because my grandfather was on a destroyer in the Med during the war, and they did see some action. So this S&T Mare Nostrum is a pretty well regarded S&T game from the Decision era. And it is probably worth a look, and I have seen it going for well north of $100. Now there's Crete and Greece, really, and I'd be inclined to cover Greece along with Crete if I were going to do a show on that. There's a fair number of games about Crete, right? You've got, just off the top of my head, you've got Marina Mercure, the Europa game, which covers Greece as well, but it also covers Crete. You've got Operation what's it called? Operation Mercury from MMP, which is the GTS Crete game. You've got Air Assault on Crete. You've got Descent on Crete. You've got, I think there's a game called Invasion Crete, if I'm not mistaken. So and Hunters from the Sky is another good one. That's the the Malmim airfield. I forget the actual name. I'm probably mispronouncing or flatly misremembering that. But there's plenty of games about Crete. I don't know that I could fill 2 hours with it, but there's a decent number, and that's a good point too. There was the Malta mini game with Air Assault on Crete. Now, Descent on Crete is the SPI one, and it's a pretty big. I don't know that it's a monster, but I don't know that it isn't. It is a fairly big game that was packaged in 2 flat trays by SPI. No Retreat North Africa did cover Crete as well. That's a good point. Well, in a big strategic level World War II game, the med can matter every time, unless the game sucks. Then maybe not. But I mean, it could certainly matter in width. It could matter in a World at War. It can matter in maybe even in unconditional surrender. So I'm not familiar with this at all. I have not, generally speaking, um, paid strict attention to Avalanche Press's output in recent years. John Nolan is quite right when he says that there's not that many games on the Japanese invasion of China. This is absolutely true. There are a few, but I couldn't even fill a half an hour with a complete list, assuming I'm missing a couple, and I probably am, on this topic. The whole subject of, so when we say Japanese invasion of China, do we mean the initial Japanese invasion of Manchuria, or do we mean the start that the stuff that starts with the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937? Because that's where most Western designers would start this topic, and it's not really the start of the topic. To say nothing of the fact that most Western designers will say World War II starts in September of 1939, and it was going on for the Chinese for several years before that. So that's another thing. Yeah, S&T Mare Nostrum 185. That so wait for your code on the first October stream, which is on October 3rd. I will make that code available. Yes, this is absolutely true. And in fact, this was the reason, and this wasn't like a newly developed German strategy in 1940 either, right? It would be the idea that they were going to cut off British access to India, or at least make it a lot less convenient, by taking Egypt and seizing the Suez Canal. This kind of thinking well predates even the building of the Suez Canal. Remember, this was one of the motivations that the Directory fell for when Napoleon was pitching his invasion of Egypt, was the notion that they could cut the British off, because there was basically a land route right through Sinai. So but even before the canal, you could still dump stuff at the on land, truck it across the Sinai on trucks or camels or whatever, and then offload it in Alexandria and ship it back up to Britain. That one of the rationales for Napoleon to go down there was, at least that he told the Directory, was to cut that off. William Aarons, thank you so much. Do hex maps create the best way to represent the North African fronts, or has there been point-to-point or area control maps that also work well? Well, offhand, Shifting Sands that we've already mentioned is a point-to-point map. So I certainly think it can be done. And when you look at it like topologically, point-to-point map or an area map is not necessarily that different from a hex map, right? One of the things that brought this realization to me was actually playing Hearts of Iron 3, where it's an area map, right? But almost all the areas have 6 adjacent areas. I'm like, why did you guys just not use a hex map for this? So this is a legitimate question to ask about any wargaming topic, really. And there is a danger, I think, in a hex map providing you with a false sense of precision as to how the terrain looks and what the traversable paths over the terrain are. Nevertheless, for both aesthetic and mechanical reasons, I personally prefer games with hex maps over point-to-point or area movement. But that's not to say that I don't play a fair number of point-to-point games. I mean, we're going to play a Paths of Glory this week, right? So, and that's a point-to-point game. So it's a question that is not uniquely applicable to North Africa, but it is a question that a designer should ask when they're deciding whether they want a hex map or a point-to-point map or an area map or whatever. Is this the best way to represent this terrain? Because maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. If you've got like impassable hex sides all over the place, like the map for Absolute Victory, for example, maybe an area movement map is just going to be better, or a point to point map. There's no reason not to do that. And some of those point to point maps are quite dense with points. So Carl says Island of Death by Avalanche Press 2008 release was the Invasion of Malta. There are some good things from Avalanche Press. Lest I be construed as saying all their stuff sucks, I do think that from what I've seen of it, the Second World War at Sea stuff is actually decent. And I think that certainly some people like Panzer Grenadier, although I didn't. And some of their independent games, their Avalanche game, for example, from Avalanche Press, actually looks pretty good. So this is true too. This is absolutely true. And maybe that's worth your time. Or maybe you can, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons to prefer one over the other. Yes, this is what I mean by topologically. The hex grid is not necessarily different from because if you think, okay, so if you think about it, a hex map is a point to point map. Every hex has a point, that's that hex, that you can be in. And then there are lines connecting it to 6 other hexes around it, right? So if your point to point map looks exactly like that, it's pretty much a hex map, right? Except that it also gives you the flexibility to say, we're going to leave a path off here, or we're going to make this path more difficult or something like that. And there's a number of different ways to handle that in point-to-point maps. John C., thank you so much. Much appreciated. Do I like the idea of moving from map to map like No Retreat North Africa does? Same thing as the Dark Sands does, actually. And in principle, I have no issue with it, right? I mean, we played Case Blue this way, where we had 2 different tables set up because you can't fit the thing on. You need 2 4x8 tables to do it, right? So it's really not a big deal to move from map to map, but it is. I think it's aesthetically less pleasing to have a map broken up in that way. And I think that a couple of games that otherwise I think would have been pretty well received, like for example, Salerno, the VCS Salerno from Multiman, which that was unpopular enough that the whole series croaked. And I think they're still trying to get rid of it. And that's not to say it's bad, but it's got another broken map where you're moving from map section to map section, and people just seem to not like that. So thank you, John, for the support. It is much and the question. It is much appreciated. Yeah. So, okay. So to some extent, to a large extent, I think this is true in a lot of ways. Every other strategic level World War II in Europe game has been, to some extent, an answer to Third Reich. Including World in Flames, which differs from it greatly in most mechanical respects. But these are all answers to Third Reich. A World at War is an advanced Third Reich, was an answer to Third Reich. We want to have Third Reich, but we want it more and better. And then they wanted more and better and got a World at War, right? If you were to look at the War from Compass, for example, yet again, it is an answer to Third Reich. And I don't think that the John Prados Third Reich and its companion game, The Great Pacific War from Avalanche Press, are less an answer to Third Reich than just because John Prados' name is on them. They are, so I haven't played them. I've heard bad things about them. I've heard that they went to a buckets of dice system, which was not popular. And I can definitively tell you that they are not attractive games. Excuse me. I personally find that Avalanche Press usually does a very nice job with counters, and on maps they're all over the place. Some of their maps look okay. Some of their maps are really hideous. So, and here's another point. So if you look at to touch back on the hexes versus areas versus points. The topological view of this. You can look at Avalanche Press's Great War at Sea and Second World War at Sea, and you see that the operational map is squares, but the squares are arranged in a brick-like pattern. So they're alternating, right? Brick, 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 right? They're squares, but it's a hex grid, right? Every square has 6 adjacent squares. It is topologically identical to a hex grid. That is water, yes, thank you. You know, it's vodka. The I still haven't finished the scotch yet. The and I find a hex grid much more aesthetically pleasing. Those brick grids from Avalanche Press are ugly, and I suspect that they may use them just so they can fit a certain number of dimensions on the map. They may be able to. It may be more compact in that way, but they're ugly. And they result in when you have adjacent occupied spaces, they result in a lot of congestion because there is no room in the hex because it's not a hex, it's a square that's exactly half an inch across. Um, this is the offset grid. Um, Again, topologically, it doesn't make any difference. And in principle, I want to say that one of the old Avalon Hill naval games, whether it was Midway or Bismarck or one of those, used that grid. But the Avalanche Press ones, real thick lines. It's really just very unattractive. My reservations on that are more or less strictly aesthetic because again topologically it's identical. This sounds like a little bit of a pain, but what I've seen sometimes is to say that okay, you've got a space between two hexes that you could just walk across for one point, and you've got like a mountain path between two other points that costs double to cross or something like that. That is a thing that I have seen before. We've also seen that in area movement games too, though, where you'll have like a mountain ridge across the border between two areas, and it costs extra to cross that. So unless you are thereby eliminating the need to track movement points with your area or point to point movement system, then you are just adding that back in if you are then going to say it costs more than one point or more than one move to cross this particular type of connection. One True Flem mentions Bismarck. Yeah, I think that's what sounds right to me. I've never played Bismarck. I've never played Midway. I'd like to play Midway. I'd like to play Bismarck, to be honest. But now I'm looking at that new Bismarck from VUCA Simulations too. So, um, well, I mean, I haven't bought anything from Avalanche Press in ages, so I cannot speak to this. But I do know that they do a lot of book games now. I think they're still doing boxes for some of the big Panzer Grenadier things, but I don't know how recently they've actually released anything. I think it's been some time. Bunny Muiri quit at Advanced Third Reich. Rising Sun is just not compatible, and smashing them together never helps. So I felt like the barrier. I agree with this statement. By the way, let me start off with that. I feel like the problem with Rising Sun specifically is that it's built on and something of an expansion of the original Third Reich naval system, which is just not particularly satisfying when applied to the Pacific. So they kind of tried to bulk it up, and I don't think they necessarily succeeded. Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun do add things to the game that I like. They added a greatly expanded diplomacy and research systems. I really liked those. I like those in A World at War, and in fact, for me personally, that the diplomacy and research systems are one of the selling points for World at War over something like World in Flames. Um, because World in Flames doesn't really have, I mean, there's a diplomacy system, especially if you use Days of Decision, but this is stiff. I mean, in principle, this is no different from people releasing games in Ziplocs, right? So, I mean, in principle, I don't have a problem with it, but it better be a damn fine book game for $100. Um, that's just me being cheap, though. Carl, creator from the War Game Boot Camp, got Chasing Bismarck from VUCA. It has two identical maps. You have screens, no umpire. That sounds pretty cool. It also sounds a lot like Battleship. So I am looking forward to watching some video on that. This is absolutely true but I wonder to what extent it is a real problem in most. This is true of hex grids too, right? There's a Pacific game, it might be Decisions War in the Pacific, that covers the whole Pacific, in which you have to have some kind of calculation at the extreme north and south ends of the map to account for the distortion. Um, and that sounds like a pain in the nuts, I gotta tell you. Uh, this is a so Ken X or Ken 10 says that what's needed for the ETO and what's needed for the PTO are so different that any World War II game covering both is going to be problematic. This is absolutely right. And this is in fact one of the challenges that is faced by a designer who has decided that they are going to do a World War II game that covers both the ETO and the PTO. Um, they are very different conflicts. Now, in the Atlantic, there's some stuff that kind of resembles the stuff that happened in the Pacific. And in the Pacific, there's some stuff that kind of resembles the stuff that happens in the Atlantic. But the emphases are completely different, right? You need a much more robust naval system to handle the Pacific. But if you go too far, you end up with advanced PTO, which is a flaming dumpster fire, as far as I can tell. It's got like a 200 plus page rule book just to be able to not be broken. And I mean, I looked at it, I'm like, oh, no, we're not doing this. So this is a challenge, and not all games that do this that are this ambitious meet that challenge equally well. I think the current set of rules in A World at War, I think, does a decent job at it. I think that Axis Empires, Total Krieg, slash Dicenso does a less good job at it. I don't think Dicenso is terribly interesting to play on its own, and I don't think it is nearly as good as because of the abstractness of the naval system and how dependent that Pacific War is on the naval system. I just don't think it's remotely as interesting as playing with the same game system in Europe. Um, that may be addressed in the new edition of Axis Empires, which will have both games and which will include Schiffkrieg, which will include a complete, less abstract naval system. But then I don't know. Are they gonna? Is that gonna ruin it? I mean, I kind of like the way the air and naval works in Total Krieg. So I don't know. I am deeply ambivalent about that. I will note, however, that it is about 3 years late. And that, for all I know, that may be why they may have just decided that, hey, we got to make this thing actually work if we're going to release this. Um, the One True Flame mentions Triumph and Tragedy and Conflict and Consequences. These I've played both separately, not together. I've played both, and I was not just surprised, but very surprised that Conflict and Consequences plays as well as it does. I expected it to be kind of a slog, and it is not. It is engaging from the first turn. I think it is pretty much the same system, actually, but there's some additional considerations you have to take in mind when you're playing in the Pacific. I actually think it works really well. It is a very abstract system, and I think that's one of the reasons why it gets away with that. It abstracts the naval a fair amount, but and this may be by design. I don't know. They may have decided this was the right level for abstraction, the minimum that we need to handle the Pacific, and then put that in Europe. I'm probably going to go against the conventional wisdom here and say that I do like the way the naval works in Atlantic versus Pacific and World in Flames. I think it's got a lot of detail, but it's not so much that it feels incredibly bloated in Europe, except for the convoys. The convoys are kind of a pain in the ass, and I won't argue with that. Jeff Beeler mentions O'Connor's Offensive, 1985. Vance von Bory's This Is an Operation Compass game, which makes sense, and the Separate Assault on Bardia game. That's interesting. Okay. Atlantic Chase, I haven't had a chance to play yet. It looks really good. I've certainly watched a lot of video. My opinion is that certainly presentationally, it's kind of best in class. There's a lot of paper in there. There's like multiple books, including books that are just designed to teach you the game. It's really well presented. Really well presented. Whoever did the development on that, I assume that's the person responsible. Whoever did the development on that did a fabulous job. trying to catch up to the chat. I think we're not too far behind, actually. I have heard this as well. I will be very so. There's a second printing of Atlantic Chase, kind of got fast tracked over at GMT. We should be seeing that soonish. I forget exactly where it is on the calendar, but my guess is we'll see it before the end of the year, possibly well before the end of the year. I will be delighted to see another game in that series. Then again, I kind of think PQ17 looks good too, and we were supposed to get another game in that series, and it's been like 12 years. So So we'll let you guys hash that out in the chat. Bunny Nori has the computer release of Whiff, comes with 3 hardcover manuals, totally awesome, totally massive. As I recall, there's no AI, so you have to either play it solitaire or by email or hot seat. Hot seat sounds totally impractical. That's a big problem, but I'm not shocked, and I guess it's been continuously updated. The interesting thing about the computer whiff is for me is that the whole thing is at the European map scale. So you eliminate the need to have, and this is another problem with including both Europe and the Pacific. The Pacific's a lot bigger, right? So you end up having either different movement rates for the two map sets or different movement costs for the two map sets. Different games do it differently. I don't know that I have a particular preference, but in either case, it creates additional headaches for the designer. On the other hand, computer whiff just handles everything at the European scale. Now I have concerns about that though, right? Because because it's a core level game. How does that core level line look in the East, or do you have just tons and tons of divisions? Maybe you do. I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that works. You could for a while, and I think you still can, buy the maps, the printed maps that come in a giant tube of the whole planet. Um, at the European map scale. America's everything, which is absolutely bananas. It's like 27 feet long. They had it on when last time Matrix Games had a sale. I thought about buying it. They had the maps for like 25 bucks. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'll get those just, for novelty's sake. And now I got a wall to paper, so maybe I'll do that. But it would ended up costing me like 40 or 50 bucks to ship it, and I balked at that. So that as game room wallpaper actually sounds like a pretty fantastic idea. I got to tell you. John, is this out or is this about to be out? I thought this was about to be out, but I may be behind on the latest news. Looking forward to seeing it. Don't know if I pre-ordered it or not. Yeah. So Carl, I was wondering about this. He played PQ17 2 weeks ago. It flowed well. He enjoyed it. Can't wait to see Norway. Chasing Convoys is cool. So one of the things that I was talking to somebody about Flat Top the other day, and one of the things that they said, and it's like, yeah, and this is true, right, is that you can like have a whole game and never find anything. And that's probably not going to be an incredibly satisfying experience. That's a legit concern. It does happen in Flat Top from time to time, but it's also part of the fun of searching. Right now, PQ17 is a little less Wild Westy, if you know what I mean, than Flat Top is, in that the way we play Flat Top, where you're playing a double blind, there's nothing for you to look at on the map. You're just flying planes around and trying to figure out where stuff's at. Whereas in PQ17, at least you have like blocks that represent the task forces that may be dummies, but at least you have some idea where they're located, right? Which is generally, I think, a realistic. You have some idea where the enemy task force is, but you need to locate it exactly to do anything, and to do that, you need to make a roll to do that. That I think is a little a mechanic that's a little bit less susceptible to being boring in actual play. So I mean, this is definitely a difference. The Japanese did not really understand the potential of submarines. Doctrinally, I'm sure were individuals in the IJN that did and lobbied for their use raiding convoys, but they didn't really use them that way. They used them for reconnaissance and occasionally engaging combat ships, which wasn't something the Germans tried to do all that often. It did happen from time to time. Um, but well, Midway's not in Flat Top. Flat Top is Coral Sea, Bismarck's. But there's a Midway game called CV from Yaquinto, which is by the same designers as Flat Top, and apparently is basically Flat Top. They found Midway. The problem is the Americans found them. Um, so the while the submarine doctrine is a big factor, there's also the big factor of we need to transport our stuff by sea to get them to wherever they're going. And that was true in Europe too, but once they got there, then they didn't have to get back on a boat anytime soon. Whereas in the Pacific they did, unless we're talking about the land war parts of it, primarily which happened in Burma and China. And or well, Burma, let's call it the CBI theater. That's a bit more accurate because not all that stuff happens in Burma per se. Um, I agree with this. I think there's a great tension in that of not knowing where they're at. Hey, enemy planes just showed up. What do we do? So I didn't have a problem with that, but I am not really going to argue with people that found that unsatisfying. So this is a thing that is in the works for Compass. It's been in the works for a while, and I'm going to take your word for it, John, that you have the name right. I keep getting the name right, the name mixed up with the other one that's coming out with a very similar title on a totally different topic. But this is basically Flat Top on steroids. And when I talked to the designer, it's like a lot of steroids. It's like steroids. I mean, it's really roided up Flat Top, right? So, which doesn't bother me as such, but if I'm making malaria rolls every day, that's probably a bit over the top. Pretty much, this is the scenario. I mean, the scenario we usually play is usually this scenario, pretty much. The Japanese want to land the troops, but there's no like land game in Flat Top to fight it out, right? So we were actually talking, and I don't know how seriously to take this talk of having some one of the art folks, and who may even be here tonight, although I haven't seen him, do a midway map for Flat Top. And I mean, you just need counters for the ships, and that's it, right? I mean, and have somebody develop the scenario would be a pretty light lift, really, to do midway in that system or whatever, right? I mean, you could even do the hunt for the Bismarck in that system, and I think it would work okay. John Nolan, Southern Cross is coming from Compass. John may remember the name of the designer. I don't remember it. I keep want to say it's Don Johnson. It's not Don Johnson. That's Don's working on the his sort of reimagining of War Between the States. So yes, CV from Yaquinto. I didn't say CA, did I? That would be not it. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Boy, and playing that Vassal double blind might be really neat too. I haven't tried to do that. And there was some expansion. I mean, there is a lot of expansion material for various Avalon Hill games from various periods in the general that showed up at some point or another. And this was one of them. There was a midway scenario in the general. William Cooper, Bill Cooper. That's right. I talked to him a few years ago at Compass Expo about it, and I'm like, this looks pretty neat. I mean, I love Flat Top. That Flat Top is great. Somebody wants to redo. Fuck, don't even put it on steroids. I don't care. Just give me more Flat Top. Give me more battles. Give me more stuff. I think it's a great system. I don't know that anybody should even really do that now. I'm not sure how popular such a thing would be, but I'd buy it in a heartbeat. So let me talk about this. We are actually closing in on the end of the road here for tonight. So I don't know that we have so we have a Tuesday game and a Wednesday game. No, sorry. We have a Wednesday game and a Thursday game. This is switched in recent months. The Wednesday game right now is Last Blitzkrieg, and I don't know that we have a sense of what we're doing next, but it might be CSS. I think that's a possibility. And right now we're having a great time with Last Blitzkrieg, so I intend to play this for at least another few months. Our Thursday game has been the third winter game, which we haven't played in about 2 months. Not because I was busy moving, but because the folks whose house we play at were jetting around the country on retirement travel. So we don't have we haven't been playing. We played for the first time in at least 2 months last week. We're playing again tomorrow night. So and then that's another several weeks off. In terms of, I will mention Chad Kennedy mentions that we have Napoleonic November coming up. I do have an unboxing of La Bataille de Mont Saint Jean. I do have an interview lined up for Labatt specifically, so stay tuned for that. There's not going to be necessarily more content, but the November content will be Napoleonic themed, and I would like to do an unboxing of a Napoleonic thing, which is all done, and then an additional Napoleonic type video each week. One of which will be the interview, one of which may be another interview. I don't know. I mean, I can always. Jim Ozarski likes to talk almost as much as I do. Jim and I can get together and talk for 2 hours about Napoleonics. That's no problem. Shit. In fact, let me talk to Jim about that. We'll get that set up. So I am not going to make the stream at Dan's place tomorrow because I have to go to work tomorrow and it's not going to work out. So I will be back with Dan next Tuesday. I sent Dan an email. I haven't got an email back yet. He should know by now that he's going to have to line up some other guest than me. I did put myself on the table for La Bataille. This is probably premature for Winterfest in February. That doesn't look like that's going to be how it works out. It's looking like I will end up playing Goss in Sandusky in February. And I've said this before. I'm always happy to play OCS, and I played OCS last year at Winterfest and had a great time. But because we play tons of OCS down here, unless it's specifically that I want to get in on the play test, which will be happening there, then I would rather play something different at Winterfest because I get to play OCS all the time. We at one point we were literally, I mean, we haven't done this for a while, but I was literally playing OCS 3 times a week at one point. I could do a video on the Zucker titles and deciphering the somewhat labyrinthine interrelations between them across multiple publishers, and so on and so forth. So I do have an interview scheduled for this Wednesday on Werewolf, which is coming soon from Legion War Games. Yes. So that is headed out this week. I don't have this week's unboxing figured out yet, but we'll try and get that done at some point before I have to leave in the morning. And we may do some Labatt stuff. I will tell you that I'll have some I'll do like a Labatt commentary video of some kind. But like the simple Labatt, the Marie Louise rules, man, it ain't that simple. It's still a pretty meaty set of rules, right? Traveler Tuesday will be back in October. I actually have something set up to record, and I didn't do it because I don't need it until next week. So there will be Traveler Tuesday coming back in November full time, hopefully. I have a pretty aggressive intentions to do a lot of videos in October. We'll see how that actually works out. But I don't know what else might be happening at Winterfest. I'm just talking to people, as happens every year. I'm talking to people behind the scenes about what's going on, and I'm hearing a couple of things. What my itinerary for that smells like is Goss Atlantic Wall is what it's smelling like as the main game, and then we may do a side game of Empires in Arms. But last time I played Goss with these guys, they're very high intensity and they play long hours. So I may or may not actually be able to swing the Empires in Arms side game because Empires in Arms is not exactly just a dirty project either, right? So maybe we'll noodle with it. We'll see how seriously we're going to take that and maybe look at it with an eye towards making it a main game at some point in the future, which would be a great event for it. And I would certainly like to try Empires in Arms. This is a good question. Do I think there's a market for a publisher that reprints out of print stuff with possible improvements to components, maps, with additional digital content PC tablet versions. I don't think the wargaming hobby is here yet, frankly. We have seen some movement on this front. So and ironically, the movement has come from possibly the most regressive of the major war game publishers, and by major I mean the ones I talk about a lot, and that's MMP. You can now get a decent amount of the out of print special ops magazines and ASL journals and other stuff in digital format, and even the ASL rulebook, which is out of print all the time, as we know, from Wargame Vault. And that is a great thing. I'm very happy. And at this point, if somebody asks me, hey, should I, I would, don't wait for the rule book. Don't get the pocket version, get the digital version. Screw it. I mean, you could buy a $100 tablet and just carry it around with you wherever you go. I don't have the device down here, but I have. So on my phone right now, wherever I am, if I'm out at the game, whatever, and I have a rules question, I can look the rules up on my phone because I have an entire OneDrive. I actually pay for OneDrive now because partially because of this. So I can it just integrates into Windows. It's just like a folder that sits on my hard drive. I can tell it to store the stuff locally or just in the cloud. And I just upload all my game rules to that, all my RPG PDFs, all my wargame PDFs. I can take them with me wherever I go. I can read them in bed. It's no problem. I can access them from anywhere. It's a huge benefit. I would like to see more of that. I'd like to see out of print games just release in print and play versions on things like Wargame Vault. Why not? Now, it's not as trivially easy as I'm making it sound when I say that. Like if the game's from 1970, then you'd have to have somebody to digitize everything and or recreate it. And then that becomes a project and an expensive project. But if it's something from 2 years ago that you know you're not going to reprint, shit, put it up, put a digital version of it. Let people print and play it if they want. You've got all the digital assets anyway. SPI games a lot of SPI games are really quite small and therefore are pretty susceptible to print and play. There's been print and play editions, versions of Napoleon at Waterloo floating around for I don't know, decades, but it's been a long time. You can go rustle those up on BGG right now. And a game that size is not a huge task to do in print and play, right? You're not going to spend a ton of money or a ton of time. You're going to have like half a counter sheet. You're good. When you get into like 10 counter sheet games, man, that's a pain in the ass. I don't want to deal with that. All right, folks. So next week, we do have another counter clipping show on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. We are planning the rescheduled and retopicked classless character stream this coming Sunday at 5 p.m. It's going to be still Eastern Daylight Time at that point, I believe. And the topic has been changed, and we've shelved the other one, but we'll come back to it, is why we are not playing D&D anymore. So tune in for that if you are so interested. We do have big plans. October starts next week. We're going to have videos as much as I can get done, right? Lots got to happen this weekend. Let me put it that way. But we do have a lot of plans. We do have the Werewolf interview. Hopefully we'll have an unboxing video ready for Thursday. We got plans for that as well. We will be back with Dan next Tuesday when it is here. Wish Dan luck. So make sure you tune into Dan's channel at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, assuming there is a live stream and he doesn't flake out. I'm sure Dan is going to be excessively responsible in that department. So check all that stuff out. I want to thank everybody who has stopped by tonight. I have no idea what the numbers look like tonight. We have topped out at what looks like about 130 plus. That's pretty good. I'm very happy with that. We are trying to do more shows like this where there's a topic, even though it didn't I got through the topic in about an hour and a half, where there's at least a robust topic that I could talk about for an hour and a half and have, some notes and stuff like that, rather than me rambling for 2 hours because I have the show with Dan for that. Right. And I think that the way people listen to this show, which a lot of times is after the fact, as on a podcast format where they just listen to the audio and go cut the grass or whatever, I think that works really well. I think this is going good. I think views are up. I think everything's going great. So if there's a topic you want to me to cover, I have a list, but shoot me a line. The email address is in the ticker, so you can shoot me a line at any time. It is spelled correctly now, so that other guy won't get the email. So let me know. Once again, everybody have a great rest of the week. We'll see you all next week and have a great night.